Okay, so we're going to look at HTML5, and basically there's a bunch of extra information in here. Really, I create these slide presentations for you to read on your own. So when I do them in class, I'll often go through pretty quickly. So basically there's a lot of history behind this. We started out with a language called SGML, which is still used. It was designed to be a machine-readable but also human-readable markup language for marking up data. It's really not a programming language, so I always kind of cringe when people say they can program because they know HTML markups. It's really not a programming language. It's a data language. The basic syntax, there we have these things called tags. And the tags are denoted by less than and greater than sign. And then the tags tend to be paired, where you have an opening tag and a closing tag. If you look here on the slide where you see tag 2, there's an opening tag and then some content within that, and then a closing tag that starts with a slash and also has tag 2. Do you guys see that? On the slide and about the middle here where it says tags can be simple, empty, or paired. Okay? So most of the tags that are important are going to be paired. You have an opening and closing tag, and that creates a content body, which is the content that goes within the opening and closing tag. We can also nest tags, so you'll see that we can have tags within tags as well. So when we have these pair tags, we kind of call that a container. And an empty tag or a singleton tag has a special ending here, which is this slash that follows the tag text. So this is a single tag that you wouldn't see a closing tag with it. Now in HTML5 you don't have to write it that way, but it's kind of good to get in the habit of doing that because we'll be using another markup language called XML where it's required. So just kind of get in the habit whenever you have a singleton tag, close it like that. Okay, tags can have attributes, and the attributes are name-value pairs. So you'll have a name and then the equal sign and then the quoted value for that. So we call that a tuple where you have a name-value pair. Those only occur in the head tags. So if you look here on the third line from the bottom where it says tag attribute equals value and then closing tag. So again, you see that the closing tag there that starts with the slash matches the opening tag, and then the attributes are only in the head or opening tag. Okay? So you never have any attributes in closing tags. Now, we're going to see that some tags are structural tags, and there's a rule about when they can occur in the document, and they might only occur one time. Okay? I don't think I have this document ready to look at here, but it'll come up. I'm going to skip the history. You can read through that. Basically, we've been doing this for over 10 years now from HTML1. The current version is HTML5. That's what you're going to be learning in here. The previous version was XHTML, which was a kind of cross between HTML and XML. We will be learning XML in here too. So HTML5 is really improved. It's a lot better. We have an easy doc type, which is the very beginning. And then we can have XML embedded in our documents. It has new features that support audio, video, SVG graphics, which we'll learn here in the course, and a new canvas which you can draw on with JavaScript. It's a raster-based canvas, and we won't do that in this course. We do that in client side. It has some other stuff too, geolocation, offline storage, drag and drop. Many of these things though require scripting, and so we don't get into them until we do the JavaScript in the client-side course. Okay? You want to write your code just like programming code. You want to try to make it easy to read, indent it, use plenty of white space. The tags are always going to be lowercase, and I think in HTML5 they're probably case sensitive. I might be wrong about that. In previous versions they weren't, but the convention was to write all the tags in lowercase, okay? Now, we could write a correct document as one long line of text, but that's not a great idea. We want to try to make our markup readable, okay? So we got 3 coding rules here. All our tags and attributes are lowercase. All tags are generally closed unless they're a singleton tag where they're closed with the special ending here, okay? So usually I'll have a pair tag like this where I'll have an opening tag followed by a closing tag that begins with the slash, or if I have a singleton tag, the slash comes at the end, okay? And then it's a good idea to get in the habit of using single quotes for the values of attributes, because later on when you learn how to script, you can put that whole thing in double quotes. So just try to get in the habit of doing that now, okay? But in actuality, you can use double or single quotes. Okay, here's our structure for our document. So you can see the first line here, we have doc type, that's all caps, HTML. And then notice that we have an HTML container. So you see that the second line has the opening HTML tag, and the last line has the closing tag. So this creates the entire document. So we have a doc type, and then the entire document is in an HTML element. Okay, does that make sense? So basically, I'll talk about tags, but really the correct term is an element. We talk about the elements in the document. Let's see, I think this goes into this on the next slide, but basically you can see also that the basic, within the HTML, we have a head and a body. And so you're going to see that the head has information about the document, which we kind of refer to as meta information, and the actual content for the web page is all going to be in the body, okay? Let me advance the slide here and see. Yes, okay, so we have one head and one body. All the content for the document goes in the body. And then you'll notice that we have a title here in the head of the document. And that's not going to show up in the page. That's going to show up on the little browser bar at the top of the browser. So usually we'll have to create like a display title, which will be in the body if you want the title to be there. I'll show you that later on. Okay, let me get back here a second. I'll just go over a couple more of these. So this meta character set, that says use Unicode with 1 byte, and for right now, let's just get in the habit of putting that in there. What we're going to do is we're going to create a template. So instead of typing all this stuff every time, we'll start with this basic part and then use it to create new pages. And so that's going to be the practicum this week. I want you to eventually learn the structure of the document. Below the title here, we have a link element. And notice that this is a singleton, as is the meta tag there. There's some other meta tags as well. So this particular link shows how to connect a style sheet. So what you're going to see is that the content of the page will be in the HTML document, and then the way that it's styled and presented is separate in an attached style sheet. So this is just showing you the links here, and basically this relation equals style sheet, type equals text/CSS. That's the same every time. I call that boilerplate. It's always going to be the same. The href is actually the name of the file, and that could be a path, but here, because it's just the name, it suggests that it's in the same directory as this HTML file. And it's pretty common to do that. Okay? All right, so again, this grew over time, and basically we're at version 5 now. As I mentioned, we're going to use this external style sheet. This is called a cascading style sheet, CSS. That's going to describe the layout and the style and the look and feel of the page. So the color, the text size, the margins, all that stuff is in the CSS. We talk about logical versus physical formatting. When they improved the HTML5, there were a lot of old tags that were physical. So like bold, for instance, would be. If you wanted italics, there was an I. And they kind of got rid of those in favor of tags that were more semantic, that had meaning. So really, bold means that I want to emphasize something strongly. So the new way of doing that is strong. And similarly, if I want to talk about text that's got just emphasis, instead of saying that it's italic, I'll have a markup that'll say emphasis. That might be rendered as italic or bold, but it's a little different, and you want to kind of think about this. It's semantics, the meaning. So we want to go with the semantics rather than with the physical description. So here you can see this old tag B for boldface is now deprecated. What does that mean? What does deprecated mean?
That is no longer used.
That's correct. That means it's no longer part of the language. So instead we now use the strong. And we actually have a validity checker that'll check our markup for us. It'll tell you when you use a deprecated tag. And so you should avoid that. Okay, so we're going to start looking at the HTML syntax. We've already seen that we have a document type for HTML5. So it just says bang or exclamation point, doc type, space, HTML. That's an HTML5 doc type. Then we have an HTML container that has within it a head and a body section. And so now we're going to start looking at the content. Now it turns out that HTML5 will let you have several different styles of pages. And the main page that we're going to play with and use throughout the quarter is the section style. So when you create your student web page, the documents that make the web page up will all use this section style. So what we're looking at here is how the section works, and this is all going to go within the body of the HTML document. And so again, you can see that everything is in a section container where we have an opening tag at the top, which is section, and then we have a closing tag here at the bottom, which is the closing tag for section. And then within the section, what are the three types that I have here, the three parts? Header, not content, main, and footer, right? So actually here, this content is the ID, okay? That's not, the element is actually main. It has an attribute of ID, which is content. That's kind of useful because it tells me what's going to go in there. Header, main, and footer, okay? And now within the header, you see this level 1, H1, that's a level 1 heading, not header, heading. And that's usually going to match that title that I put in the document. So that's the title that will show up in the browser section for the page. Okay, right now there's no content here in main. And there's no content here in footer. Again, notice how every container has an opening and closing tag. So really this is boilerplate too. And as we go through, we'll explain everything. Real quickly, this nav section here is where the internal navigation links for the site goes. So if I have a menu where I have a series of pages that are connected that form my website, that's where those are going to go. Okay? All right, real quickly, an alternative to article, which we won't do, to section, which we won't do a lot with, is an article. Now, strictly speaking, you can have more than one section in a given page, and when you use article, you must always have more. So really what this article is for is a high volume website like a blogging site or a news feed site where you have a lot of content. And again, you can see this semantically. You have this article and it has its own information, and then each article would have its own, okay? So we're not going to use this for our student website. We'll use the section instead. Later on, I'll show you more about this, okay? Now it turns out that they have something called an aside, and that kind of works with the article. So this is like a sort of sidebar in a magazine article. It's kind of a related little bit of info. Okay. We also are going to have something called jQuery Mobile, all right? I know this is a lot of information right off. Don't worry too much about it. The main thing we want to get at the start is this HTML structure with the head and the body, and the section structure within the body, which is a header, main, and footer. Okay, so it's not too difficult. I'm going to show you this right now, though. jQuery has a very similar structure to the section style. And so what happens is I have a division, a section of a page that's called a division with a div, and it has a data role of page. And then within that, I have 3 divs. One has a data role of header. Another has a data role of, this is actually changed now. It's actually main. I'm pretty sure it's, no, that's right. It is content, sorry. And then data role of footer. So you can see that's kind of very similar to the section structure, right? jQuery Mobile is a JavaScript markup language, and it uses code, and we won't write any code, but what it'll do is it'll make our pages interactive so they'll work better on small form factor devices like my phone or tablet. So that's a really good thing to learn, and really it's just a different extension of the markup. So we won't do this initially. We're going to mostly work with the section style page, okay? So I just wanted to show you initially that these page structures are real similar, okay? So once we learn the section one, we'll see that the jQuery Mobile one is very similar. Okay, HTML elements occur in 2 varieties. They're block and inline, and you just kind of have to pick up which is which. The difference here is the way they're displayed by default. And so basically a block element will be displayed, and then the browser will go to the next line and continue to render the content. So the way that the browser renders the content is kind of like when you're typing in Microsoft Word with word wrap. And so it'll start laying the content out on the left-hand side, and when it gets to the right-hand margin, then it'll wrap around. And the inline content does not wrap until it gets to the margin. But if you have a block element, it inserts a new line and it goes to the next. So you'll see this as we go, and it'll make more sense. Okay, so now basically I'm starting to look at the content that can go in the page, and this is mostly in the body. So we're going to talk about what we can put in the body of the document. And so within the body of the document and within my subsections, which are the header, the main, and the footer, I can have these elements. So the first element we're going to look at is called a heading. And there are 6 versions of this. So we have H1, H2, H3, H4, through H6. Does that make sense? Now, when you have that, you're going to have an appropriate closing tag too. So look at there. It says my header text H1. That has an H1 closing. I'm not going to have a closing that doesn't match the opening. Okay? And so what this does is it creates a sort of title that says my header text, and then a subtitle, one level down, by Tom Wolfe. Now those have some default styling on them, but we can override that completely ourselves. Okay? And it's important not to confuse these H1 headings with the head or the header elements for the page. Okay? They're different. So here's how this would look in the browser. My header text is H1, and then by Tom Wolfe is H2. And because these are both block elements, they appear on a separate line. If they were inline elements, they'd be right after one another in the browser. Okay? So here we go. H1 content, H2 content. And then this describes what I already mentioned about how the content works. So it's going to flow from the left to the right. If we have a block element, then it goes to the next line. Otherwise, it just goes to the next line when it runs out of space and runs into the right-hand margin. One thing that's a little weird about HTML when you first learn it is you don't have fine-tuned control over it. So if I put a bunch of spaces in my markup, that's good to make it readable, but when the browser renders the HTML page, it's going to reduce that to just one space. So you don't want to try to fiddle around with the layout arbitrarily. One of the reasons for that is what you're doing is you're actually writing code that's going to be displayed on a variety of browsers on a variety of devices. And so you really can't predict exactly what the style is going to be. If you're a designer, this is going to drive you crazy because you're used to doing, very laid out functional design, and here you have to kind of be a little bit more flexible. Okay, so this layout I talked about is called flow layout, and if you've done the Java GUI programming, that comes from there. But it's also, again, this word wrap that we all know from working with a word processor. Okay? Now, despite all the stuff I'm telling you right now about how blocks display and everything, you have total control over the page with the cascading style sheets. So you can say make the block element work inline, you can make an inline element work as a block, you can position things on the page, etc. Okay? Okay, let's talk a little bit about some basic text tags. So we have our paragraph text, and that's a block element, and then the content of that is going to be the actual text for the page. And then we have this special break that we can use to force a end of line, okay? And that doesn't insert a new line. Generally, you want to try not to use that, okay? Occasionally, we'll use that to fiddle with the layout. So let's look at a quick example here. And to make this fit on the slide, I've abbreviated it, right? So basically, we have the head of the document, which is not shown where the 3 dots are. And then here in the body, I have the section. I've got something here in the header, which is probably the title of my page as an H1 element, but that's not shown. What we're looking at now here is this section, and actually I noticed there's a problem here. This actually should be just main, not a div. Let me fix this real quickly. And what's going on here is this is actually the previous version where this was XHTML. So I didn't catch that. I'll have to fix this for you. So let me fix this real quickly. Okay. And then we'll save, and then from current slide. Okay. Oops. So my apologies there. So again, it's the header, main, and footer. And so here within the main, I have this code, and it's a little simple poem. And then if we look at how this would be displayed in the browser, it's going to just run it all together until it gets to the right-hand side, and then it'll word wrap around. And that's not what we want, so we have to format it. So if I go ahead and put a paragraph around this, and notice this is an opening and closing tag, and then I have my line breaks to show where the breaks go, then this will go ahead and format correctly, and that'll look like this. Okay? Now, if you think about the semantics of this, that makes a lot of sense, right? So really, when I'm talking about a poem, we can think of each stanza as kind of a paragraph, and then the lines do have breaks at the ends. So you see how I have to format that? Now, if I wanted to, I could make each line a paragraph. That doesn't really make sense semantically, though. And when I display that, I'll get this extra space in here between those. So really what I wanted is what I had to start with. Okay? Again, this should not be a div here. This should be a main. Okay? I'll fix the slides and get them up there for you. So this would be a main, and then this is the closing main. Now, we'll get to this, but basically, when I give things an ID, it has to be unique to the page. So within the document, I can only use that ID one time for that particular thing. A class describes things, and I use that to apply text. So for instance, to apply style. And so I might have several poems in the page where they all have a class of poem text, and that's allowed. So that's just a convenient handle to allow me to apply style. Okay, so we can create HTML documents with simple text editors, but it's a lot better to use a sort of what you see is what you get kind of editor like Dreamweaver. We can use Visual Studio. Don't use Expression Web, that's way too outdated now. You can actually use Word to create web pages too, but the markup they create is kind of overblown. There's a lot of extra markup in there. And so what I'm going to suggest is that we use Dreamweaver, and I might show you a couple other editors here. There's one called Notepad++ that you can use that's good. Essentially, you want to use a tool that has some help about the HTML markup, not have to do it all from your head. I'm just going to mention this. We won't do any of this in here, but we can actually write programs that generate HTML. So we can do that with Java. And if you're taking the CP1 class, I actually will show you an example of that. Now, one thing I'm going to mention here is you really want to try to learn the code, okay? And so one of the things I'll do is almost always I'll work in the code view of the tool. Occasionally I'll use the preview view, the display view, to kind of look at how the page looks. But it's really important that you learn the markup, because if you're going to go further in the software development track, you're going to do scripting where you have to generate HTML code, and then you won't have the advantage of what you see is what you get editor. So our focus in the course is to learn the markup and learn it pretty well. Okay? All right, so again, we're going to use the Dreamweaver. And let's go ahead and maybe take a preliminary look at that.